Hi, and welcome to the 56th episode of China Talk. I am not your usual host, Basil Plasm. I actually have no idea where he is. He's not asleep, but I think he's busy. Um, I am instead Sir Nugan. I used to host Into the Rift, and I don't watch as much China, so I'm pretty much here to learn about China from your usual hosts, panelists. Sorry, Kelsey, Emily, and Drexxin.
Hi,
I guess we'll just
let's
go.
talk about China, guys. Right.
Alright, I guess let's just start off with the semifinals. I know you guys covered it last week, but I guess we're gonna go over it briefly again. So first off, do you think that LGD overperformed
Didn't release
or
the episode last
EDG underperformed in that series?
Hmm.
Anyone?
Need to go to my mind palace and remember the set.
so
EDG was
I
like, their drafting was really weird.
Oh, that's right.
I don't think they came in like I think in comparing like the drafts overall and like what they were doing, like the first game was kind of indicative of what was going to happen throughout the entire series, where like LGD was like, here, have literally everything you want. Like put Clear Love on Eve, put Pawn on Yasuo, put Deft on Jinx, put Mako on Annie, and then Koro was playing Lulu for whatever reason. And they like
Lulu was a good champion.
yeah, Lulu is like my Sivir now, Kelsey. Like what Sivir is to you, like Lulu is to me at this point. Thank you, Josh, for that. But like, and they picked champions that they were more comfortable on in a better composition, and we're just like, okay, we'll let you have all your comfort picks, but that composition doesn't really make a lot of sense. And like EDG, I felt like this was their best game of the three. So like they did a couple of really weird like where it wasn't necessarily a bad choice to team fight, but they wouldn't all be on the same page, and it was really awkward to watch at times. Like they seemed to individually be having like bad games, and then it would affect like the overall cohesion of the fight. Like I thought Clear Love didn't play especially well in this game, and I don't know. They looked like surprisingly out of sync throughout the entire series, and they didn't draft well at all.
Well, I think in that first game, yeah, I do think that I do, I do think that in the first game, like them going comfort picks screwed them over because even if they played mechanically well, there was really nothing they could do because LGD had a comp that made sense they could just sit there and scale with. And Mako was the only one that had Engage on their team, and it was Annie, so that's super unreliable. You have to wait for Flash to be up every time to get Tibbers and Engage. And eventually they just scaled so hard that it didn't even matter if he stunned like 4 or 5 people. And the decisions they made outside of that were just so stupid late game. Like Def didn't build any armor pen, so you could, and like it's not like they could just stun the backline and destroy them because Def couldn't get to them. So the front line was just so tanky that he did no damage. And then like Clearlove was playing super derpy, and he tried to be like a superhero and like dive in and steal dragons and shit late game, and it would get him like caught in the dragon pit. And so yeah, it was like really really sloppy. And I agree, they just weren't on the same page, but they also just made really really weird like fundamental decision errors, and that was really strange to me.
Kelsey, you have anything to add to that?
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to say that first of all, when you see a team all where a bunch of individual players seem to be playing like questionably, it's usually not that they all are randomly deciding to screw up. It's just that they're being on the same page. Their shot calling is really weird. And I think that was pretty clear here is that they didn't necessarily know what to do. And part of that, again, goes back to drafting because, for example, in Game 2, they had that really awkward composition with Ryze, Lee Sin, LeBlanc, Corki, and Braum. Where it's just like Clearlove would go into team fights and just die, right? And then, but if you're the rest of the team and you're watching him initiate and you have like this LeBlanc and all this other stuff and you're just like, what the fuck are we supposed to do with that? So I don't really understand the argument that they all played poorly or someone played poorly. And for example, I think Pawn played okay until Game 3. I wasn't really super impressed with his Victor. The big thing about some of their drafting, though, for me was it wasn't just that they all went for comfort picks. And okay, so not so much the drafting, but when you look at the first two games, especially, their initial gameplay was much better. They actually had the early leads in both of the two games. So when people make the argument that TBQ like out jungled Clearlove, I don't.
And I actually
think TBQ team fought better than Clearlove.
I think people that say that just didn't watch the game because TBQ just randomly died in the jungle. It's like
Yeah.
didn't get the free farm that entire game. It's just I also can't really tell.
In the first game, Clearlove counter jungled him really, really hard. And in game 2, he ganked. EDG had like 3 times as many kills, and Clearlove was participating in all of them but one. So but the problem I think was that they overfixated on mid lane, right? So, and usually when you focus jungle pressure on mid lane as EDG, your bottom lane is going to fall behind. Like Deft usually requires more lane pressure than the other lanes to get their laning phase even. So I think that, especially against Imp and PYL, who are probably together the best duo lane in China, was like really, really stressful. But because LGD has so much farm priority mid, obviously they're going to focus mid and try to counter that. But the problem with that, of course, is that like they couldn't, especially in game 2, where they picked this like super early game heavy composition. Like LGD knew they were going to go there. How hard can you telegraph we're going to gank mid by picking Lee Sin and LeBlanc? Like that's really, really obvious. And they just counter-ganked them with like 4 people, which I don't think was TBQ. That's the team, because if you noticed, he didn't really make any solo ganks. He missed like a lot of Gragas casks. Like the guy, he's not the best Gragas player all the time, but his team fighting was better.
Yeah, he's
like
not
again, we talked about Clearlove going in, and then TBQ had actually had some of the better casks in team fights of his life. So I guess that's my main argument when we talk about like Clearlove versus TBQ in the series.
I want to add to that, like, the mid lane priority really surprised me because EDG hasn't really been a team to previously, like, turn to pawn. Like, I've never felt that they worked the best when they turned to pawn. They're like, okay, we're going to have you carry, as opposed to having him, like, run distraction and having, like, either Koro carry or having that kind of, like, 3-man, like, roaming squad to keep Deft safe and having Deft carry. And I thought this composition was really weird because you have Deft. He's going to hit the early power spike with the Trinity Force. He's against a Kog'Maw, so he's going to get outscaled. Yep. And you then have Pawn on LeBlanc. So, like, you're basically telling me that, okay, Pawn, like, it's all on you, buddy, after a certain point, which is kind of weird because I think it runs, like, counter to what's worked for them in the past, so I'm wondering why they actually chose to do that for the series.
Yep, it was, I don't know.
They do that against IG a lot, right?
IG, it makes...
They actually have done that against IG a lot, because IG is very, very mid-centric, and if you look at the percentage of team goal distribution for LGD, Willis actually receives the most percentage team gold of any mid laner in LPL. So if you're talking about, okay, we applied this strategy to a mid-centric team, let's apply it to this also mid-centric team, and it might work again. But I guess the difference is that I think LGD's side lanes are so much more consistent and much more capable of carrying if there's a lot of mid lane pressure.
I was going to say,
in both of the semifinals and the finals.
That's fine to attack IG that way because the Tai is going to lose in a lot of matchups just because he still doesn't have a lot of experience. Like I love Tai and he's been doing a lot better, and I'm sure I'll talk about him later. But in terms of like going up against like someone like Koro, obviously you can count on Koro to pretty much win that lane. So, and then same with the bot lane. I think that Imp and PYL are obviously a lot stronger than Kid and Kitties. So
yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nice.
I mean, it makes sense.
But
if you're
they did
trying
so
to, like,
well against Deft and Maker.
It makes sense if you're trying to shut down Rookie, but I mean, another problem is that like these last few weeks have probably been Imp's best in his career, and then they just like decide to ignore him on a hyperscaling champion, even though in that second game when they were all focusing on getting Pawn ahead, that like Imp had his flash, he had his flash blown at level 1. and they just didn't like decide to do anything about it. I found that really weird. And the reason, like another thing, like again, like yeah, they weren't playing, or they were playing well. They just made stupid decisions. Like Clearlove, I think it was really really dumb, especially when they were relying on LeBlanc's burst to go Warrior into Black Cleaver on Lee Sin. And like you'd get instantly blown up as a result of that. And he didn't even finish those items until 25 minutes in. And on top of that, it wasn't benefiting anyone but himself because EDG were running a double AP composition in that specific game. So I don't know. It's just like a lot of like really dumb decisions. And then LGD just did the same shit. They just were like, okay, well, we'll just scale better. And oh, there's a LeBlanc. Okay, well, all right, you just go Mob, Milmortius on COG, and we'll just all build counter AP items. And okay, I guess you can't do anything now. We're just gonna roll you over. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was just really weird decisions going into that series in general. And then they were just so discouraged in Game 3 that they pretty much just let LGD do whatever they want. And there was, wow, no initiative at all from EDG.
All right, I think that's pretty fair. So for now, we'll just move on to the other semifinal. How do you guys feel about the IGQG series? What was the deciding factor between the two teams?
It was so impactful that I literally don't remember a single game.
It is not the greatest.
Italy was the deciding factor.
Yes, Swift.
For the most part, because you had the first two games, Swift had Italy and Cacao was like literally useless, and then the next two games, Cacao had Italy and Swift was literally useless, and then the fifth game they banned Italy, and then TNT just played Sivir and Kid and Kitties like died randomly, and then they just won.
That's a pretty good description of the set.
That's good. That's a good TLDR.
I still think Chaogu was like I said this in the last episode, but I don't think it released or whatever, but I do still think that they have like this pedestalization issue with Swift that they've been trying to get over that they fixed in the finals, I actually think. So yeah, that was like the one thing I didn't really like about the QG versus IG set is it's like it seems like they want TNT to carry, but it still feels like even if he gets a lot of resources funneled to him that it's still like the Swift team. So I don't know. Yeah. The Swift show. Why didn't they say that? It makes so much more sense.
Yeah, you have to.
My bad.
You have to focus a lot of resources on healing for Swift, which is what I actually think is the good thing about Chaogu is that you can make both. You can have TNT like TCT focus entirely on peeling for like Swift and B, and then to an extent also Doinb focus on peeling for Swift and B, and then both Doinb and TNT like literally don't need peel. They're just fine. So I think that's probably the strength of Chaogu is that both of their main like traditional carry roles are extremely self-sufficient.
I have something to add to that, but I'm going to save it till when we talk about the finals.
All right. That being said, for the third place match, how do you guys feel about IG? And regarding the problems you guys highlighted about EG in their previous semifinal, do you think they persisted throughout the third place match?
I actually think IG were super genius in the EDG set because they just king banged Clearlove so hard. They just banned him out every single game, and they made it so he couldn't do anything. And Clearlove was still stupid enough to pick like farm reliance junglers. Like, wait, wasn't he?
No, he played Lee Sin. He played.
Didn't he play
Rek'Sai?
He played Echo.
Yeah, he played Echo. Which
Rek'Sai was the game they won. He played Echo. He played
Lee
Sin, he played Rek'Sai, he played Lee Sin.
Why?
So he picked Lee Sin, Echo the first game, I think, probably to deny Cacao, because Cacao played like a lot of Echo during the regular season, but he hasn't really played it.
But yeah,
he hasn't played it in a while. Since the Echo nerfs, he hasn't really played it. So I think that was like really strange.
Okay. Yeah.
He also has
thought they
said a lot in a lot of interviews leading up to it. Sorry. So for people who are seeing like us talk over me or me talk over other people, Kelsey's right now.
She's got a few seconds lag delay, so
yeah.
I think after a certain point, I might just have to dictate who talks first. So
delay. Yeah.
Kelsey's just rude as fuck. He's like, Drexxins needs to talk more. I'm gonna start talking now.
Alright.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good.
For this episode, hopefully I'll have better connection this episode.
Yeah, but I
everyone just talks, and then I save what I save for the end. So.
Why don't we all just talk at the same time every time you ask the question, and then we can get the show done in 20 minutes? I mean,
Yeah.
people can just dissect it later, and, like delayer the audio. No, but yeah, it was actually a really good idea to ban out Clear Love so hard because like Cacao was able to do so much work in these games, and like he even skipped Sightstone in a couple of games just because he was like so far ahead and was like playing that carry force, and it was really really smart. And I actually think that IG's bottom lane was really really good in the set too. Like I think Kitties and Kids showed up quite well, and I am so happy that IG didn't decide to use time for this. Like, for
Yeah.
this.
I think the thing that struck me a couple times in the series, like previously, I felt like IG had no idea what to do past like a certain point, or like obviously they'd get either leads and throw them randomly by taking like bad fights, or they would fall behind and then like just slowly lose because they didn't know how to come back. I felt like they used their resources a bit better in these games in terms of what people like, how the team works, like making Cacao the carry, sending Zatai to split push. I thought the idea to put him on Trundle was great. I thought the bottom lane performed, like Mike said, a lot better, so that they could rely on them to just not get like absolutely trashed by Deft and Mako, and then so that Cacao was a little bit more free to do whatever he wanted, either farm up or gank or whatever. So I thought that was really smart. The problem, in my opinion, with IG is that I can't rely on them to play at this level, like, always. I was really happy that Mata obviously returned to do their draft because, you know, their drafts were incredibly bad without him. But I just can't, like, it was cool to watch, like, finally IG, I felt, understood themselves again, but I can't necessarily say that they're going to be that team again in the regionals, which is why I'm still like really oddly shaky on them making it to Worlds.
I don't even know if you can say they. I don't even know if you can say they like they discovered themselves, because like their philosophy in this set was just so much different than like they've ever done before. I mean, I think it's better just to say that they've found a way to play the game that actually is correct, because instead of playing reactive, they actually do make moves and don't just fall over and die when they fall behind.
Well,
so they're like, hey, it's easier not to fall behind when we're actually doing shit.
I think I guess like what it reminded me of is like past a certain point last split, I felt like they really figured out, like they had trouble getting the team together. Like they had Pokemon in the top lane. That was a bad idea. And then
that was when they had Save on the lineup, by the way.
Yeah, they always relied on like Cacao and Rookie to carry, and that hasn't changed. But I felt like towards the end of Spring Split, they kind of figured it out. They're working more together as a team. They put Zatai top, and that worked really well. And then after the EDG lost, their first EDG loss in the regular season this year, I felt like all that fell apart, and they were like, oh man, like everything we've been working for, like there goes our motivation or whatever. Now we don't know how to play the game again. So this was nice because, again, I don't think it was like a miraculous self-discovery, but I felt like they were finally again using the team, like the pieces they have correctly, I guess.
I can agree. Oh, and it also doesn't help that Pawn slumped like a motherfucker in the set, like gold carding and porting bottom and shit. Oh my god, that was so bad.
Gold carding a minion.
Pawn made me angry that weekend.
Oh god.
Okay.
Kelsey, you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm stopping so you can talk.
Yeah. Sorry, I just like there's the back and forth, and I'm waiting to the end to address my issues, I guess. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, I think the big thing about Clearlove was they didn't necessarily ban him out, because even though they picked, like, in 2 games, they picked away probably 7 jungle champions, because EDG banned 2, IG banned all of his 3 core champions, and then they first picked a champion, and that was game 2, and then in game 4, they banned all of his core champions again, and then they first picked a jungle champion, and then they picked Echo. second rotation. But then, so the thing that I want to say about Clearlove is that he still had early pressure again, like on his Lee Sins, and then on his Rek'Sai, of course, his Rek'Sai is ridiculously good. And I think now it has his highest or second highest win rate of all champions that he's played. But so that was the game they won. But the biggest thing is that they banned out like his team fighting champions, like the Nunu, the Evelyn, the Rek'Sai, all champions he has really good team fighting pressure on. And then they picked away the Gragas, which also really, really, really good team fighting pressure on Gragas. So the thing here is that he doesn't necessarily have as much team fight pressure, and that was the thing that was kind of letting them down, ironically, because again, I love the thing we've always said about him is that he's not a jungler, he's a team fighter. In the like before this year, that was something that was very true, and people who didn't watch the series and saw what happened is just like, oh, Clearlove isn't really a jungler, he's just a team fighter. That's always been true. But if you actually watch the series, that's the opposite of what actually happened. So again, I think that was a huge problem. There was a lot of mid priority, and we talked about how that usually works against IG, right? A lot of mid gank priority because their side laners usually don't step up. But Zatai, like the way IG has been working, even when they've been passively not doing anything, is a lot of pressure top, and he was very effective in that this series, even though the other two lanes were doing a lot of stuff too. Kid said in an interview after the series that it wasn't true that he went home to try to work on visas. He actually just needed a break and asked for a break, and when he came back, he felt much more motivated and much more confident. So I think that was reflected in how he played this series. Also, yeah, that's kind of my main issues with this. The Echo is something that Clearlove has said he's been practicing and was going to pull out. I thought he actually played it pretty well in the first game. The other thing I will say about EDG is that they actually had a lot of team fights, even from behind, when IG would get this huge thing where they actually aced them from behind because IG made dumb mistakes or because their coordination suddenly would click at these moments. So for me, it was like you can still see this high level of team play and coordination in this team, and if they come to regionals with a game plan, they're probably just going to rock it. So that's kind of how I feel, is that like IG just had this game plan, and that's something we've seen of them in the past, is that when they have really good drafts, when they have really clear game plans, they can be a good team, but they just kind of lost that. They lost their clear game plans. They've lost their motivations for a lot of this, so it was like I was really happy to see that again in this series. To an extent, a little bit in the QG series, for those two games. So I hope that it comes back again for regionals, and we have like 4 really competitive teams there.
So everyone's kind of talked about their thoughts on IG, whether or not they have or haven't found themselves. But what about EDG regarding the third place match and going into regionals? How do you feel about EDG?
Okay, so I actually don't. I don't take a whole lot out of. I mean, the LGD and EG or LGD versus EDG set is one thing, and while I do recognize that, I think it's actually false that EDG didn't care about the IG set because they're so emotional after that. I do think that the implications of the set doesn't have much to say about their like regional performance, just because the set, like, first off, the set wasn't realistically that important, and additionally, like, the way that IG went about it was really, really smart. And I think to say that EDG is like not a good team, or maybe even not a top 2 team after this set, is kind of like jumping the gun, especially just because they focused out Clearlove, and Clearlove was forced to play like champions that he's not entirely familiar with, and so they were kind of forced into a style that they're not really used to, and also it was a really bad week for Pawn and even Koro to some extent. So I think given that circumstance, I don't think it's saying much about EDG. I mean, I would be really surprised if they still weren't going to Worlds or whatever, since I know that that's a possibility. I still don't see them not at least qualifying for Worlds.
I think they'll definitely qualify. The patch of regionals is 5-16, right?
Is it?
I thought there weren't going to be any competitive games on 6.
It might be.
That's what I thought.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, that's what Western Riot
Well,
said.
that's true.
Western Riot,
I don't know about
no.
Korea or
That's
China.
true.
Yeah,
Western
I
Riot
know
often doesn't know about what Chinese teams are doing. So.
Korea is still going to be on 5-15.
I would say that
I've heard, but I don't know about China.
Okay, and I think it's the same time, right? Because it's September 5th for Korean regional.
I think
Or am I
so.
wrong?
Yeah. Let me double check.
So if it's the same time, Korean and Chinese patches have been pretty much in sync. So it's probably
Thank
not
God.
going to be 5.16 if it's. So yeah, but it would be interesting if it were.
The only reason why I'm asking is because I feel like that would have a significant effect on how teams like prep for the regional.
Especially
Yeah,
if they have to use
it's
some new
almost the same
juggernauts.
day. It starts on September 2nd, whereas the Chinese regional starts on the 4th. So 4th through 5th for China and 2nd through 5th for Korea because they have the weirder gauntlet format. Um,
Yeah, it's like
I'd
fourth
be like
through sixth.
I'm curious to see EDG on the new patch because I think it shifts a few things around to where like the team might actually be a little bit more comfortable. Especially since Pawn really won't be playing like from what little I know, like I think he'd probably be more on like I guess probably safer zoning champions, which I'm not sure how that would work out. Because as Kelsey mentioned before, like his picture was incredibly underwhelming. So I am curious to see if it'd be on the new patch. If it's on the old patch, I think they'll actually just completely stomp. If it's on the new patch, it could be really good for them or really bad for them. I haven't really made up my mind about that, to be honest, now that I think about it more. But I think there's this weird, like, I don't know, like devil effect around EDG where like they lose one game and then suddenly the sky is falling, and I don't get that. Like people had the same reaction to when SK Telecom lost to CJ Entus in Korea, and they were like, "Oh man, like is SKT like have they been bad this entire time and Korea is bad because they're our only hope and blah blah blah." And it's like, well, no, like I mean, IG like LGD, I expected them to kind of surpass EDG at some point. I didn't. I mean, like we all kind of agreed that LGD was second, if not the best team in China, and that they would have the tools to beat EDG. We just didn't expect it to happen this early. And I don't know. Like I guess I'm just sick of people saying that EDG is suddenly like super bad now, and that it reflects poorly on the region as a whole, and et cetera, et cetera. Because like no. They're not super bad. I think they'll figure it out fine. I do think their drafting was really suspect in these, like especially against LG.
Clearlove was exposed, Emily.
No.
If you just ban everything and just
TVQ.
The new law of
if you
China.
ban everything and then just live in his jungle.
Clearlove will play Lee Sin, and he won't teamfight as well.
Oh my god, I already have a headache. Like I guess my request is
You have to ban 7 champions.
just stop, calm down. Like they're still a good team. They're still gonna go to Worlds. Like I will be honestly very surprised if they don't go to Worlds. And yeah, I mean they have like a few minor things to work on, but I don't see them losing in regionals, to be quite honest.
So, I think this is my turn to talk. I'm not sure. I was
Go ahead.
a
Yep.
little bit loud.
Go for it.
But my point is, I think the way I would have adapted if I were EDG in the drafting game against IG is when you see them banning all these champions that Clearlove is super effective on, you kind of know at that point that maybe you aren't going to win through team fights. Like, you're not going to have the same team fighting presence from Clearlove. Or maybe your lanes aren't going to do as well with as much pressure because he hasn't played like some of these other champions as much. So, in that case, maybe you should pick strong lanes. I don't know. Like, this is an amazing concept instead of like literally a losing lane in every game. Because when Clearlove is on these strong team fighting champions, you can make those comeback team fights. right? You can make those plays. But if you just draft such that every single lane loses in laning phase, that's not going to happen. You're going to have like a weaker team fight and a weaker laning phase. So just pick, like, it's not a coincidence that the game they won, Deft was playing Lucian, right? That's like pretty obvious. So, okay, that was the game that they won bottom lane pretty hard. And he was also, Clearlove was also playing Rek'Sai that game, which is pretty significant. But I still think like the Lucian was huge as opposed to having him play like Twitch one game. First of all, so not only in that game where he played Twitch did they have losing lanes, but they also didn't really have any wave clear outside of Pawn. So they just got pushed onto. They couldn't really fight back, so they couldn't hold for a comeback. And they also like couldn't team fight, and they couldn't, like, it was just a disaster of a draft in most of those games. So just like when people say, oh, it's really easy to expose EDG, just ban a bunch of junglers, that's no, because you can react such that your lanes can win without jungle pressure in drafting phase. Like, it's not a weird concept or anything. And that's something that EDG failed to do. So I think that that's something that they've learned that they'll hopefully learn going into regionals. Again, one of my favorite quotes about this, though, is when Clearlove said, if we stumble in playoffs, we might have trouble in the World Championship, we will win the World Championship, is what he said. But if we just win easily, World Championship will be harder. So, I mean, he probably didn't expect to, like, careen into the wall, but they stumbled. So maybe whatever concept made him make that quote initially is something that will make them better for regionals. So.
All right, I think that's pretty fair. So for the big match, there's the finals. Do you think LGD played or drafted worse than they did in semifinals?
I think, let me look at their drafts really quickly. A lot of it was centered around Lulu.
Oh, also keep in mind that QG used double teleport when you
like I thought the first game, it wasn't like they picked the Kog'Maw, like, so QG picked Lulu first, and then LGD countered with the Cog to deny like basically a Juggernaut coming out of QG. I think the drafting was okay. Like, they got, I mean, TBQ on Rek'Sai, like, is what it is. He's fine on that champion. Like, he's not going to light the world on fire, but he's not going to light the world on fire on most champions. Godby got Orianna. Imp, they picked the Cog because he's been doing, like, so ridiculously well on that champion. And a lot of people have pointed to that pick, like, because obviously it was picked not only for Imp, but also to deny from QG. A lot of people have pointed to that pick in the first game and been like, well, they shouldn't have picked the Cog without the Lulu. And I actually don't mind the Cog pick. I think the weirdest thing about especially the first game was that LGD seemed like really off. Like, not in terms of like the actual mechanical play, because like there's this like absolutely gorgeous like headbutt pulverize coming out at like where PYL like flashes for it, and it's just like one of the most beautiful like mechanically executed things you've probably ever seen. But in terms of like choosing when to fight, there were a lot of weird like Alistar engages and other engages where they didn't respect the fact that Doinby had the teleport up. And, like, sure, Lulu teleporting into the middle of your team fight isn't going to be, like, super amazing, but Doinby manages to make it work. I think he rushed Rod of Ages first in that game, too.
Yeah. Which worked well, because he was, like, a magnet for, for like, soaking everything. So
it was honestly,
he just knew, man.
Like, it was a perfect... It was perfectly executed by Doinby, and it was
so
aided... Yeah, it was aided by the fact that I don't feel like LGD really respected the double teleport as much as they should have, and I felt like they chose some really funky engages that like previously I wouldn't have thought that they would take because they would have known better. So I thought like especially in the first game it was kind of weird to see that strong of a showing come out of Chaogu, only because I felt like LGD, not necessarily because of draft, but just because of like choice in skirmishing and like a couple of PYL's ganks were kind of random and weird. I don't know if you guys agree with me on that. But that was the thing that stood out to me in the first game. Like I didn't think it was like more of a. I thought it was less of a drafting issue and more of like a decision making issue. And then Chaogu, obviously, like they completely took advantage of it. Joinby was everywhere on that Lulu. Obviously they team fought amazingly well. And kind of the story of the series for Chaogu was that like a lot of the time they were putting TNT in these really like disadvantageous situations again. So he did not like I don't think he played super well across the series, but I also think that was exacerbated by the fact that he was put into losing matchups or lane swaps pretty much every single game. So I don't know. I've heard a lot of like pushback on TBQ or not TBQ. Oh my gosh, TNT. And I don't think it was as much of him screwing up as it was LGD like an imp choosing like stronger laning matchup or just the stronger lane. Just like I don't know. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I actually think that for most of the series you're right, but I actually think in the first game that TNC outperformed Imp pretty hardcore. But yeah, it did seem like a weird disconnect in terms of communication. Like I feel like the ball deliveries weren't so hot between PYL and Godv, and I definitely am glad that as the series progressed, LGD tried to focus more on picks and skirmishing than team fighting. Because dear God, like QG was so much better than team fighting. It was like almost embarrassing. Like their focus targeting was insane. Like they were so good at picking out key targets and focusing them down. And LGD, at least in the first game, was like the complete opposite. I feel like they forgot that a Vayne existed in that game. I went back and rewatched the first game just because of I was like amazed at how many free autos Vayne got off. Or TNT got off, and it was ridiculous. And on top of that, it wasn't just QG just relying on team fighting. They were actually really, really smart with their engages. Again, polar opposite to LGD. Like when QG made a decision, it was always like really intelligent. Like the thing with LGD is I feel like it was really uncharacteristic of them to do the things they did because a lot of the times they're known to be the smart team, so they'll always do things when they have vision of people that could interfere with their plans or anything like that, but they actually just kind of like winged it a lot of the time. Like with their dives and stuff, like they would just wing it and it wouldn't pay off all the time. And QG was like the polar opposite. They were really calculated, and I guess they have that. I guess they kind of have that privilege a little more freely because of the double teleport. But for instance, like when they were focusing Baron, they'd always do it when they knew they were hitting a power spike or when LGD weren't able to shop for a long time. They'd start up Baron, and I felt that was like really, really intelligent of them. So yeah, I think QG prepared really hard for the set, and there was just some kind of disconnect in LGD.
Kelsey, you got anything?
Kelsey.
Your turn?
So, yeah, so first I just want to address the first game, since we've talked about the first game. I do have some problems with their draft, but I think it's more that Chow picked around it really well. So it's a little bit tricky to get first of all, like LGD doesn't really have an option for, so that's one thing that's pretty clear to see. So if QG wants to take a fight, they can take the fight pretty much whenever they want, and they have a lot of tools to do that with like the Lulu, the Maokai, the Gragas. Obviously, Braum is kind of a weak engage relative, but so they had a lot of options for taking whatever fight they want, and then LGD didn't really have an option to disengage. The other thing was that LGD's composition was pretty reliant on getting like the wombo of the Gnar engage followed up by like the Alistar Pulverize, and then the Orianna Shockwave. But pretty much whenever that happened, either TNT would use his Condemn or he would tumble out of the way, and they just like wouldn't have a combo. So that was like a pretty good play from UD in order to react to like the Vayne. Pretty good. And I think his Vayne play definitely justified it, especially considering that, like, again, Doinby wasn't using those ults to peel for him, right? He was teleporting into the center of a fight and ulting himself.
Yeah.
Right? Or he was ulting V to get the engagement. So I think that TNT played, like, really self-sufficiently that game as a Vayne, and the one fight that they did lost, right, like, was the fight that LGD did get the combo and engaged extremely well. and he died, and then so they lost. So even if you look at the damage charts and say he didn't do as much damage as Doinby or whatever, like he played a pretty key role in those fights and got a lot of, as Drexxins said, like free hits. So I think overall that first fight was like really smart reaction to some of LGD's picks, and then of course the Lulu became like a really really huge thing, right? The first pick Lulu decided all 3 of the first 3 games, and they removed the Lulu and LGD started to win. Look at that. In the ban phase. But so I don't know. It was really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the Fiora pick. This I think showed the most about why Xiaogu won and EDG struggled, or not didn't win, but why Xiaogu won games and EDG didn't, is again back to preparation and understanding your opponent and playing against it. Whereas EDG, I felt like playing against LGD, they didn't do the due diligence that team usually does in terms of coming up with these drops and all these things. But Xiaogu, they obviously either came up with an anti-Fiora comp on the fly, or they knew that LGD was going to play Fiora, and then after getting destroyed by it in game 2, played a really good anti-Fiora comp. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people looked at that game for whatever reason and said that Godway lost like the game for them by losing mid lane so hard. First of all, like Swift does 2 really early ganks against him as Kassadin, which Kassadin I think is a soft counter to Victor, but that's only if you get to level 6 without like dying a lot and then can get the really good team fight. But obviously that didn't happen. Swift got 2 really good ganks. Doinby was really ahead and he kept pressuring that lane matchup really well, which is something they didn't do in EDG, right? In EDG, when Pawn played against EDG, they had a Victor and Pawn played the Kassadin, and Doinby just kind of passively farmed. Swift didn't show up to gank. So they learned from that and they changed their tactic to dealing with Kassadin so that they could do it really well. The other thing about that is I think they didn't have, like Acorn couldn't do anything because first of all, they opted into the lane swap that countered the Fiora, right? So that they could have Imp like still get ahead, because by picking the Ashe, which they picked the Ashe fairly late, Ashe will counter both Fiora or Kog'Maw, so you can either choose to let the Kog'Maw lane versus the Ashe and then like get kind of messed up early on in the game, or you can lane swap and then just like completely screw over your Fiora. And then once they tried to team fight with the Fiora, you have so much stuff that counters the Fiora, like again the Lulu counters the Fiora engage, like you have the Victor that can stop her pretty easily with some of the gravity fields. You have Ashe, which can like single her or the Kog'Maw out in the team fight. So there were just like a lot of really good answers to the Fiora that they did after getting destroyed by it in game 2, which shows to me that Xiaogu like came prepared. They knew they were going to pick the Fiora, and they decided to answer it with a smart composition. And then game 4, like there was the really really cool Doinby tower dive, right, where Doinby like won the team fight as the Azir that people talk about a lot. But again, like you're seeing Doinby play all these team fight champions against Godway, who played like a lot of pick champions, and so he's going to get pretty good farm, have like pretty good wave clear, and do well in these team fights. Like that's what those champions are picked for. But in game 4 and game 5, with like the Lulu out of the picture and more focus other lanes from the jungler, we had Godway do a lot better. We had Imp like do extremely well, and especially with the Callista Thresh lane, extremely strong.
Oh my god!
Right,
Like,
because it's going to crush you.
They banned Callista for 3 games, and they're like, oh, let's just let them have this.
I couldn't believe they let that through. Like that was such a mistake, and
yeah,
I have to say
because they banned the Lulu, right? So
yeah, they banned Yasuo, Diana, Lulu. I think the other thing that should go like on record is that I thought Acorn had a monster series. Like even in the games that they lost, I thought Acorn was doing a really good job in terms of his understanding of like when to come in team fights. It didn't always work because, like, for example, as Kelsey said, that the second Fiora game, he was obviously so far behind that like he couldn't really do the same amount of like healing, and he couldn't get in to do enough damage either before he got blown up. But I did think that his like, it's weird. LGD like chose, especially in game 1, some really weird fights and engages that they shouldn't have without like necessary information. But then on the flip side, as a team, I felt like Acorn was really well like integrated into what they wanted to do in terms of like his teleport timing, his flanking. I thought was really good. Um, the only like criticism I have of him is that sometimes his team fight targeting wasn't like the best, or like I'm thinking of primarily that one Gnarl like right outside of the Baron pit where he just totally misses the Vayne, like gets everyone else but the Vayne, so then TNT is just sitting there like basically DPSing across the entire team fight untouched. But I thought that Acorn like did a really good job in this entire series, and that's obviously a team thing too because it's not just the top laner in terms of like teleport timing and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, his game 2 teleports are a little off, and I do think game 3, his Fiora wasn't so hot, but that's not really his fault because Godv got camped so hard in his Kassadin that like they were just able to zone him out for most of that game. But yeah, I don't know. They did do really well, and I do like how they adapted to more skirmishing throughout the series, except for game 5. I actually think that it was kind of cool because QG was out team fighting them for the majority of the series in terms of raw 5v5. But I think that in game 5, like LGD just randomly had extremely good team fights, and I still think that even though Sivir's like nerfed, they're really, really good at utilizing that champion, and it showed when they like picked their engages in their fights and stuff, and how they were like super far ahead in towers and dragons in that game. But yeah, I was like a little concerned because I felt like as the series progressed, Chao Gu's like drafting got dumber, but I don't know why it was, but I thought it was kind of weird. But I actually really liked I really liked Doinby's like tanky Roa Lulu engage style. Like I thought that was actually really cool.
Oh, I thought that.
I was gonna say, I think just one thing
think-
to add on top of that, I think one thing that made a huge difference in team fights in game 5 was that Godv was on Victor or not Victor, oh my gosh, Vladimir. And
Yeah.
that made such a huge difference in terms of like what he could do in team fights. I thought that was like massive for them in the last game because they had two huge areas of zone control, and then on top of it, Imp can pretty much like even though Sivir's nerfed, Imp can pretty much fly anywhere, and TVQ's Gragas wasn't miserable, so they sorry, close again.
Sorry. So I just wanted to also talk about like we kind of praised LGD's like game against GG and stuff like that. The other thing, that's where they got the advantage in team fighting, but Choku is the team fighting team. So when we talk about LGD looking maybe shakier in the late game team fights in this series, it's like that's because they're against Chogu. So I think because LGD have always had a few like questionable problems with some of their coordination, especially around TVQ and stuff like that. But Chogu, that's never really been their issue. So when we talk about how like they look a little bit worse, I think that's part of why is that Edward Gaming, who are usually really good at team fighting, had like these really weird comps that didn't work together. So LGD had pretty much whatever they wanted to do in a team fight they could.
Yep.
All right. So you guys kind of talked about it earlier, but then we switched over to Acorn's Fiora. Overall, do you think TNT sucks, or has he like gotten better overall?
No, TNT is awesome.
Don't think TNT sucks at all. Stop saying that, people.
I think for the
but
majority.
He's the Chinese Vardags, guys.
Oh,
did people actually say that?
Wait, really?
Apparently,
people say that?
Holy fuck!
Oh,
No.
okay.
Yes. Yep.
I'd say for the majority of the regular season that TNT was actually the best AD carry in China, and I'd say for the last couple of weeks, sure he slumped a little bit, but I think his performance was really good in this playoffs. I actually think he was just thrown into circumstances that weren't really ideal for him. And not to mention, if we're basing it off the grand finals, we also have to keep in mind that you're seeing him against Imp, who is like in the best state he's ever been in, and is probably the best AD carry in the world. So you can't say TNT sucks. Like there's gray areas. There's not just like black and white. And arguably, not even arguably, like Imp just has the better team too. So TNT working with what he had, he did an extremely good job. And even though I said like, okay, a lot of the reason he was able to get away with stuff was because of LGD's poor focus prioritization or target prioritization. Like, that's not to take away from how mechanically good he was. Like, he had some really sick plays. Like, in game 1, he pretty much, like, reacted instantly and flashed some shockwaves and shit, like, when they were sieging LGD's base. So he is really, really good. That's crazy. It actually blows my mind that I've never heard people said he sucked.
I'm not sure. I was just given this question to ask, so...
Okay.
You can't, like... I feel like anyone who's looking at this and saying that TNT sucks is ignoring two things. One, the person who dictates the pace of the lane, if it's like 2 people in the lane, so if you're not abandoning your AD carry and your support's going to roam, it's actually the support. So if you're saying that they have a weak lane, if you're saying that they pushed up when they shouldn't, because a couple times they did, I'd actually more prioritize that on like overall team shot calling, and then additionally how the support is actually playing the lane. Secondly, if you continuously put your AD carry in really disadvantageous situations and then expect, like, I felt like because of the way the lanes ended up working out, TNT more often than not was in a poorer situation than what LGD was, especially like looking at game 4, for example. You're putting him up against Kalista, right? Like, that's
Was to thresh even.
Yeah, like that's awful. Like, I mean, I don't like, I don't know. I feel like if you're singling out and you're calling out TNT, you're completely ignoring what both teams were doing with early map pressure and how they were treating the map as a whole. Sorry. That's just what I think.
We talk about like the jungle pressure, right? And how, you know, I think a lot of teams against LGD will prioritize mid lane because Wylist tends to get so much team gold. And I think that Swift played like a really great series and it worked for them in a lot of these situations. Actually, to prioritize the mid lane just because of the way they set up their compositions and the fact that Godway wasn't really playing these like team fighting mids for at least like 3 of the 4 games in this series. So he ended up kind of in the situation where he had to get ahead early, like the LeBlanc almost, and he had to get these picks, and he had to be, especially LGD is like, you need your mid laner free to roam sometimes if TBQ isn't performing. I actually think TBQ performed worse in the series than he did in the EDG series. Then you really need to have Godway like free to roam, and PYL focused a lot more on the 2v2 because Imp was doing so well, so they put more resources on Imp. And so I think in shutting down, like in focusing mid, it kind of worked for Xiaogu, but still, like, the bottom lane was huge. And usually Xiaogu does have a lot of bottom priority in ganks, like they usually do. And part of it is that TNT and TCT's laning phase really isn't that great. And again, like when we talk about the laning duo, I think they have really high. But individually, TCT either makes some interesting decisions or his positioning in lane is kind of awkward. So he will just go forward and he'll get chunked down a lot, and that will just like lose them a lot of these 2v2 engages, or he'll ward strangely or anything like, or he'll pick like strange place times to ward and he'll get caught in tribush or whatever. I don't know, it's like really hard to look at them independently, but I do think they have a lot of laning issues, whereas we're not only looking at TNT versus Imp, right? We're looking at TCD versus PYL.
Yeah.
So
that's the huge matchup. Like,
yeah,
when you're comparing,
kind of...
if you're comparing these two lanes, like, and that was kind of my point earlier, where like the support's dictating the pace of the lane, and if you have PYL versus TCT, I'm sorry, TCT is gonna lose.
Yep.
And I don't want to say that like TNT, it was like you can't criticize him at all. I do think his laning phase is a problem. I think that he could probably choose to trade more than he does, and some of his farming even in like 2v1s isn't as like mechanically strong. But I mean, the way that this team works is originally this team was picked to be built around TNT, but they put like a lot of their resources and their peel around Swift to like support his engages and stuff like that. And because, again, I mentioned this earlier, of how self-sufficient Doinb and TNT are in terms of not needing peel is really kind of the foundation of this team. So I don't know. everything for me.
TNT doesn't suck.
He's not the Chinese Vardak. Okay, I think that's pretty much agreed across the board. So that being said, who is everyone's MVP for the finals?
Oh man, I just have to. Actually, do I? Yeah, I think I do have to go with Imp. Cause okay, well maybe not, cause this game 1 kind of sucked. But every other game,
He still did a
Imp-
lot of damage in game 1.
yeah, Imp is really good right now.
I mean, he was playing Cog, but
Yeah, that is true. It's kind of hard to not do a lot of damage when games draw out as Cog. But no, still, I do still think he was really, really good. And they also showed why you should like ban Callista.
Yeah.
Because that was like the stompiest playoff game ever. It is so bad. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and go with Imp, I think.
Okay.
And I would say like PYL or Godv or something, but I actually feel like they weren't on the same page this series. So if I was gonna say like, I mean, I might switch my answer if it was for like the whole playoffs, but for the finals, I'll definitely say Imp.
All right. This time we'll go second to Kelsey. Who's your MVP?
I agree. And I think if you do MVP for the entire season, the entire summer season, you have to go Quill over PYL just because both their teams went through like a lot of random shit, but they managed to come out at the end with like pretty strong performances, and then LGD just was able to pull it together in a pretty short amount of time and wow playoffs. So it's either PYL or Quilla for me for like the entire season, but just Imp. Last 3 weeks, supposedly, you know, the rumor is because his girlfriend dumped him, but he started practicing a lot more and he looks like really, really good. So I think Imp because he didn't really have a bad game. And I think the biggest things for LGD winning, as convincingly as stated against EDG, were the draft, which we already covered, but also Imp's improved performance over where he was this time last spring. So, yeah, for me, Imp.
All right. How about you, Emily?
I'm gonna go with TBQ because he didn't fuck up now. You know
He did
how
pretty good in the set though.
like IG like
Thank you, Kate.
I know, like
Yeah.
that time where IG and they asked who the MVP was and they said Pokemon because for once he didn't fuck up. No. I think I would have to agree with him because I've watched him for a really long time in Korea, and I feel like he's always been that player who needed his handheld because some of his decision making would be too aggressive, or he'd not like, I don't want to call it mispositioning, I guess, but like he'd just be too forward, like too too aggressive. He wouldn't be with the rest of the team. He'd be like way out in front. And sometimes that doesn't always work. You just die. So, and a lot of the time that's what would happen when he was on Samsung White. They'd just be like, oh, like, an Imp is just going to go way far forward and try to kill someone with Switch and then end up dying. And it didn't happen super often, so it's not like you can say, oh man, he was so, like, up and down, because I don't think that's true either. But I think in terms of being more self-sufficient and not making those poor decisions, he is so much better, like worlds better, to the point where he can actually play up in the front line as a Kog'Maw without a Lulu and still be positioning really well, doing damage across the entire enemy team. So, and that's something that was really impressive to watch. And obviously he does have PYL with him, but I think one of the things that happened this year where Mata left lane a lot to ward, but he always kind of would come back to babysit Imp, and I don't feel like he ganked as much as PYL does. I don't feel like he needed to control the map as much as PYL does, because PYL has to make up for a lot of TBQ's insufficiencies, as does the entire team. So, I mean, I think that's necessitated a kind of like new self-sufficiency from Imp that we didn't see while he was on Samsung White. And I think that is really awesome, and it kind of came into fruition across this entire finals. It's like a accumulation of that.
All right. So is the
Explanation.
MVP. I guess the last thing we're going to talk about is the briefs. Is like the summary of what's been going on with LGD. There's been some drama lately, and who wants to sum that up for them and me?
I just want to say the most dramatic thing about LGD is that TBQ thinks he's the third best jungler in LPL, and that only Dandy and Clearlive are ahead of him. And when asked if he's the number one jungler, he said, "Not yet." I just want to throw that out there. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. So,
TBQ.
That's
I
a
think
problem.
that's drama in itself.
that's the real problem with LGD right now.
It's something.
Anyway, TBQ circle jerk aside, yeah. So yeah, I'm not like fully in tune with it because I've had to talk back and forth with Stephen Yu and Rachel on the translation of the topic, but essentially they're just having a lot of coach drama with Chris, who's decided to leave, and LGD is also kind of like, it's kind of up in the air as whether they'll get punished or not because of or what their punishment would be, rather, just because they have been breaking rules with their current coaching situation. So yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I'm trying to like read back into it because it's a lot to remember, but Chris got in a fight with their manager and PYL, and PYL, if you didn't think he was a cool enough guy,
Yeah.
look at this guy stand up for his team. Like, holy fuck, this guy is like one of the best supports, and he's such a good like team leader. It's obnoxious. Like, if you need to see, like, if you weren't convinced by how bad or how different LGD were without PYL on the team, like at the beginning of the split, like this just like fulfills like how important PYL is to his team. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And you read it, and it's like, it's the best because he never, he like doesn't, he sounds like really firm, but he never gets into like name calling or anything like that. He's just basically like, leave my players alone. Like, and it's great. I love POL. I'm so happy he's going to Worlds.
God, Cowboys like what he said. We're talking about the LGD drama, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I kind of zoned out for some reason. So my big thing about the LGD drama is that if you go way back to the start of the split, right? Their coach was BSYY, excuse me, I always screwed that up. BSYY was their coach initially, but he had a lot of personal issues this summer and starting like late in the spring. So effectively this summer they didn't have a coach until like week 7 or 8. Okay, so they were going without a coach, and a lot of people watched this team and they saw Acorn in particular and they said, oh, Acorn's playing like shit, put Flame in. The reason why Acorn's performance dropped a lot is because he split a lot of his time between playing and doing coaching duties, like researching the game. Like, they didn't even have an analyst at this time. Researching the game, coming up with like strategies for pick a ban, helping the team, things like that. So Acorn was being a boss during this time, but they really wanted like a coaching staff and stuff like that. So they picked up a Taiwanese analyst named Firefox. If you don't know who he is, he used to coach a team called Taiwan Esports Dragon. And he helped them a lot with their picks and bans. And you start seeing them in Game 7 and Week 7 and 8, where like they're doing much better. A lot of their lane swapping situations look a little bit better. And already LGD is a really smart strategic team. So the addition of a coaching staff isn't going to make them like better overall at some of these things. Like, if you have players like Acorn and PYL who are just like so smart about the game on your team, you need someone to facilitate, you need someone to like add an extra voice, and you need someone to organize it all, right? So that's mainly what they're looking for, though apparently the Taiwanese analyst is like really smart about the game. According to Godwin's like statement also said, our analyst pretty much gave Chris like everything in terms of the drafting and all this other stuff, so he didn't really have to do this. And then I talked to some people within the organization who said, yeah, he does a lot for the drafting. So that kind of start to see them ramping up a little bit slowly, and then they add Chris as their head coach in week 11 of the regular season, and by his own admission, he said like he abandoned Newbie to come to this team, and he starts working with this team in week 11, and then the next week there's the semifinal where they beat EVG. So in the end, he's kind of like trying to take, from my perspective, it looks a lot like Chris is trying to take credit for the team qualifying for the World Championship, because they qualified through the semifinal after QG also beat IG. And that's kind of silly. I don't know. Like, if you say, I'm not saying that Chris did nothing, because I actually do think that Chris is the type of coach that would do really well on LGD, because he isn't necessarily known for his game knowledge. Like Starhorn Royal Club in 2013, when he coached them, even made this comment, like, at first when we came, we didn't really know what he was doing. We thought he was just there to order us food. And then when they got to the World Championship, they said things like, we didn't even know what jungle follow was. Like, we had to learn jungle follow from the teams that we competed against at World Championship and all this other stuff. So strategically, he isn't necessarily known as the best coach or the coach with the most game knowledge. 2014, a lot of Starhorn Royal Club's strategy, they admitted, came from like the Koreans and their Korean coach Vaikal, because they had two coaches at the time. They had Vaikal and Chris, and Chris was still like the discussion facilitator. And I think those types of coaches are really underrated, especially on a team like LGD, where you have a lot of people who are already committed to learning about the game, already really smart, already have knowledge, and you have an analyst. So you want someone who the players can talk to and say things like, I have this idea, but it kind of like steps on what someone else said. Can you bring it up for me, or something like that? Like, that kind of coach, I think, is really undervalued. And I think that's the kind of coach Chris is. But at the same time, he was there for 2 weeks. Come on. Yeah. Like, 2 weeks, guys. That kind of coach isn't going to make a team win EDG if they didn't already have like the ability to win EDG, to beat EDG effectively. So for me, and then a lot of people watching the Gu series said like, oh my gosh, they fired Chris and then they look like shit, which I don't know. If all this internal stuff is happening, I think that could probably attribute to some of it. I also think that also really, really undermines some of the improvements and some of the intelligence with which Gu came to the series prepared, and which EDG very obviously did. So, for me, that's kind of the TLDR of the coach drama. Oh, and also there's the Home thing, which Home, by the way, guys, was supposed to help coach the team starting at the beginning of the season, but then Vici immediately bought him back in like week 1. So Home, there's this thing where Home was supposed to come back, and like at the end of the season, they said, okay, Vici didn't make it. Can you come consult with us? Which the chat logs say consult. He's not really coaching. He's consulting. Whatever. I don't care. Like, something. Home is somehow involved.
He's their dirty
but there's
little
probably
secret.
not a paper trail that can point out that he's involved. And in that case, like, I feel like there's probably not anything that's going to happen with it. So at this point, it's just like a nuisance and annoying that all this stuff is happening for them.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really care
But
about it as
hopefully,
long
like,
as it doesn't affect the team.
Firefox can. But it sounds like to me that they're going to make Firefox like the head coach for the most part, I think. So it's not like they're going to be without a coach or anything like that. I'm not sure if this is confirmed or not, but it sounds like that's what's going to happen. And he was the one doing the pick ban in the finals. So a lot of people were like, oh my god, Home's pick ban in the final was so terrible. Well, surprise, it wasn't Home. So you're probably not paying attention to the coach who was actually there with. It's actually Firefox, and he was the one who did the pick ban for the EDG series also, supposedly. So it's not like two different types of pick bans. So.
Yep.
I love Chinese drama.
Well, there's also the OMG drama.
Yes, there is.
The ongoing OMG drama
I've
forever.
been saying forever that Chinese drama is so much better than Western drama. People are always like, people watch NA for the drama, you for the mid laners, and also this stuff is like, dude, Chinese drama. You don't even.
There's a reason why all Vietnam
NA
does
drama.
is dub over
I'm-
Chinese dramas for my parents to watch, obviously. That's what I grew up on. Alright, well, I think that's all we've got for this week in China Talk. Yes? Or is there something else anyone wants to address?
Nope. I mean, besides,
We'll
like,
do a
shoutouts
regional
and stuff.
preview next week.
Yep.
Alright, cool.
Yep, sick.
I think we're done then. Thanks for watching.
No.
Wait, what?
No. Shoutouts. Shoutouts.
Alright, Raz isn't here to
Shoutouts.
fuck up shoutouts. That's right. Alright,
We
shoutouts.
must do shoutouts.
All right, so Drexxin, start with your shoutouts.
Uh,
All right. So I just want to do shout outs because you have an interview
I
that
do.
should be shouted out. Yeah. Okay. So Steven here did a interview with I Will Dominate, who is very, very wrong in his predictions, but you can see on
So
Esports
it's
7.
special.
And additionally, if you want more insight on the drama, Steven Yu did manage to different Steven, not Noogs. This is a different guy. He did translations on the drama over on our site too, and additionally, you can get in. There's another interview with LGD after they won the championships in LPL on our site, and the greatest part is just the team is just so humble, and TBQ just thinks he's the fucking hottest shit on the planet, and like all of his interviews, it's just the greatest. Like,
Yeah,
It's-
he's
it's
like
wonderful.
number one narcissistic.
Number one jungle
like I mean,
Yeah.
they're like, do you still think you're number one, Godby? He's like, well, I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to practice. I think I slumped a little bit. I gotta work on myself. Yada yada. And Imsal like, yeah, I gotta owe it to PYL and my teammates. And TBQ's like, bitch, I'm the best. He's got shit on me, son. I carry my team. So yeah, it's great. But yeah, it's good stuff.
Oh my
All right,
god.
Kelsey, got any shoutouts for you?
yeah, okay, so my shout out is to the Score Esports. I did a lot of, if you like Europe, I did a lot of European interviews. I did a press conference and I had like 4 or 5 player interviews from the third place matches and the finals. And I have another interview that will come out with Deficio leading up to regionals with Europe. And then I also have done recently an article about Imp. If you love Imp and you agree that he is the MVP, you should read my article, or maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should. I don't know. I said something. Read the article if you don't like Imp, or if you don't like Imp. Okay, that's my story. And shout out to PYL.
That's right there.
Yeah, shout out to PYL for winning his first LPO. Like, that guy has, everyone talks about how much Cacao deserves to go to Worlds. PYL has been playing since like late 2011 competitively, and he almost made Worlds twice now. So he almost made in 2012. Like, if there had been a third team, it would have been his team, but he technically wasn't on it at the time. Like, he left right before regionals, so it's really awkward. But he almost made in 2012, and then last year, like, Cool kind of noped him to making Worlds with his crazy Ari game. So, it's really exciting to see him coming this year.
All right, Emily, shoutouts.
Shoutouts to LL Esports and Liquid Legends because that's where I write, and I would say I'm writing a preview of the SK Telecom versus KT Rollster match, and if you're not familiar with it, it's like kind of this huge rivalry, not just in League of Legends, but in Korean esports as a whole. And it's going to be, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a close finals, but I think it's something that's really cool for Korean esports. So check out my preview, even though a lot of other people are going to be writing previews that are way better than me. I think I look at it from a different perspective just because I went in and studied like the junglers pathing and kind of what they do for their team. So that's what I kind of focus on. And yeah.
You really don't think it's going to be close?
Not if KT plays the way they did against Q. Yeah.
You think KT's going to win really hard or what?
No, I think they're going to lose really hard.
Wait, seriously?
Or
Dude,
not.
I think it's the
Really?
perfect meta for someday.
Yeah,
I think it's
I was
the
gonna
perfect meta for
say.
someday.
I don't
think-
know. I think
Emily's just too scared to have faith in her own
gonna win
team.
too.
That's what this
Dude,
is.
I really think KT could win.
it's probably because I'm super harsh on KT, but I think
it's going to be SKT. Yeah, I agree.
I think we just scared the shit out of her, and now she's just not going to publish her article. Like, oh my god, what are you guys saying? I'm wrong about everything.
No.
just go over
Like, I think I agree with Emily. I don't think it's going to be that close. I think SKT is going to
like
win.
I think
pretty
SKT is
decently,
going to
so,
stomp.
I don't know.
Just based on, I don't think it's not that it's a bad meta for KT. I don't think it's because they can't win the early game, but I actually think that they have a really, really poor understanding sometimes of their specific win conditions for certain team compositions, as well as Nagane's role on the team as a whole. And I think that's a huge problem for them. And it was definitely apparent in the Coup series. So Like, I love KT. I want them to win, but I think they're gonna get stomped.
I think True sucks. No, I didn't say that. What? No.
Alright, shout out to Esports Heaven, where I write, and Drexxins is my boss. And then, he already said that I had the interview with I Will Dominate's up there already. And shout outs to Raz for being too busy complaining about 60 ping to be here, I guess.
Oh yeah, shout outs to Steven for being our temporary host. For
We also have an interview with Raz on our site because.
Oh yeah, it's I forgot about that for some
reason. The TLDR is basically like IDK lol. That was like the intro to like all his questions, like oh, yeah, and then
Raz is just as awkward in his interview as he is in his shoutouts. So.
Yeah,
I had to
extra
condense
memes, we also have
his
a broken
awkwardness
chart
though
interview,
for the
so.
text interview. his
I
shoutouts were like
imagine.
10 times more awkward in voice. What? Yeah.
Dude, when I was editing that shit, I had to remove haha like 18 times.
I wasn't sure if you should keep that
It's
in
like-
or not.
Just like I don't know, haha, blah 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 blah, blah haha. I'm like, dude, please.
It was way worse in the actual interview.
Oh, we miss you, Raz.
Yeah,
One-
I don't know where he is. anymore.
One day we
That's
just need to have a
probably the
host show. We just need to have a host show and just have like Cepha, Noogs, Frost,
Raz and Frost, yeah.
and then for just throw Hugo in there as the one.
Oh yeah, shoutouts to Hugo.
It'll be the
for,
best show ever.
Shoutouts for Hugo for bringing me to Cape Cream Barbecue when I was in New York. Alright,
Oh my gosh.
well that's been episode 56 of China Talk. I think the episode will be up in a day or two. I'm not sure on YouTube. We'll figure
Never
it out. Alright, see ya. Hi, and welcome to the 56th episode of China Talk. I'm not your usual host, Razzleplasm. I actually have no idea where he is. He's not asleep, but I think he's busy. I am instead Sir Nugan. I used to host Into the Rift, and I don't watch as much China, so I'm pretty much here to learn about China from your usual hosts, panelists. Kelsey, Emily, and Drexxins.
Hi,
I guess we'll just
let's
go.
talk about China, guys. Right.
I guess let's just start off with the semifinals. I know you guys covered it last week, but I guess we're going to go over it briefly again. So first off, do you think that LGD overperformed
Didn't
or
release the episode last
EDG underperformed in that series? Anyone?
I need to go to my mind palace and remember the set.
I mean, EDG was like, their drafting was really weird.
Oh, that's right.
I don't think they came in like I think in comparing like the drafts overall and like what they were doing, like the first game was kind of indicative of what was going to happen throughout the entire series, where like LGD was like, here, have literally everything you want, like put Clear Love on Eve, put Pawn on Yasuo, put Deft on Jinx, put Mako on Annie, and then Koro was playing Lulu for whatever reason. And they like
Lulu was a good champion.
yeah, Lulu is like my Sivir now, Kelsey. Like what Sivir is to you, like Lulu is to me at this point. Thank you, Josh, for that. And they picked champions that they were more comfortable on in a better composition, and we're just like, okay, we'll let you have all your comfort picks, but that composition doesn't really make a lot of sense. And like EDG, I felt like this was their best game of the three. So like they did a couple of really weird, like where it wasn't necessarily a bad choice to team fight, but they wouldn't all be on the same page, and it was really awkward to watch at times. Like they seemed to individually be having like bad games, and then it would affect like the overall cohesion of the fight. Like I thought Clear Love didn't play especially well in this game, and I don't know, they looked like surprisingly out of sync throughout the entire series, and they didn't draft well at all.
I actually think TBQ team fought better than Clear Love.
I think people that say that just didn't watch the game because TBQ just
I
randomly
actually think
died in the
TBQ
jungle.
Yeah.
It's like he
Yeah.
didn't get the free farm that entire game. It's just
Ugh.
I also can't
And in
really
the
tell.
first game, Quailove counter jungled him really, really hard. Like,
Yeah.
and in game 2, like he ganked. There were EDG had like 3 times as many kills, and Quailove was participating in all of them but one. So but the problem I think was that they overfixated on mid lane, right? So, and usually when you focus jungle pressure on mid lane as EDG, your bottom lane is going to fall behind. Like, Deft usually requires more lane pressure than the other lanes to get their laning phase even. So I think that, especially against Imp and PYL, who are probably together the best duo lane in China, was like really, really stressful. But because LGD has so much farm priority mid, obviously they're going to focus mid and try to counter that. But the problem with that, of course, is that like they couldn't, especially in game 2, where they picked this like super early game heavy composition. Like LGD knew they were going to go there. How hard can you telegraph we're going to gank mid by picking Lee Sin and LeBlanc? Like that's really, really obvious. And they just counter ganked them with like 4 people, which I don't think was TBQ. That's the team, because if you noticed, he didn't really make any solo ganks. He missed like a lot of Gragas casks. Like, the guy, he's not the best Gragas player all the time, but his team fighting was better.
Yeah, he's
like
not
again, we talked about Quailove going in, and then TBQ had actually had some of the better casks in team fights of his life. So I guess that's my main argument when we talk about like Quailove versus TBQ in this series.
I want to add to that, like, the mid lane priority really surprised me because EDG hasn't really been a team to previously, like, turn to pawn. Like, I've never felt that they worked the best when they turned to pawn. They're like, okay, we're going to have you carry, as opposed to having him, like, run distraction and having, like, either Koro carry or having that kind of, like, 3-man, like, roaming squad to keep Deft safe and having Deft carry. And I thought this composition was really weird because you have Deft. He's going to hit the early power spike with the Trinity Force. He's against a Kog'Maw, so he's going to get outscaled. Yep. And you then have Pawn on LeBlanc. So, like, you're basically telling me that, okay, Pawn, like, it's all on you, buddy, after a certain point, which is kind of weird because I think it runs, like, counter to what's worked for them in the past, so I'm wondering why they actually chose to do that for the series.
Yep, it was, I don't know.
They do that against IG a lot, right?
IG, it makes...
They actually have done that against IG a lot because IG is very, very mid-centric, and if you look at the percentage of team goal distribution for LGD, Wales actually receives the most percentage team gold of any mid laner in LPL. So if you're talking about, okay, we applied this strategy to a mid-centric team, let's apply it to this also mid-centric team, and it might work again. But I guess the difference is that I think LGD's side lanes are so much more consistent and much more capable of carrying if there's a lot of mid lane pressure.
I was going to say,
in both of the semifinals and the finals.
That's fine to attack IG that way because the Tai is going to lose in a lot of matchups just because he still doesn't have a lot of experience. Like I love Zatai, and he's been doing a lot better, and I'm sure I'll talk about him later. But in terms of, like, going up against, like, someone like Koro, obviously you can count on Koro to pretty much win that lane. So, and then same with the bot lane. I think that Imp and PYL are obviously a lot stronger than Kid and Kitties, so...
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nice.
I mean, it makes sense.
But
if
they
you're
did
trying
so
to, like,
well against Deft and Maker.
It makes sense if you're trying to shut down Rookie, but I mean, another problem is that, like, these last few weeks have probably been Imp's best in his career, and then they just, like, decide to ignore him on a hyperscaling champion, even though in that second game when they were all focusing on getting Pawn ahead, that, like, Imp had his flash, he had his flash blown at level 1. And they just didn't, like, decide to do anything about it. I found that really weird. And the reason, like, another thing, like, again, like, yeah, they weren't playing, or they were playing well, they just made stupid decisions. Like, Clearlove, I think it was really, really dumb, especially when they were relying on LeBlanc's burst to go Warrior into Black Cleaver on Lee Sin. And, like, you'd get instantly blown up as a result of that. And he didn't even finish those items until 25 minutes in. And on top of that, it wasn't benefiting anyone but himself because EDG were running a double AP composition in that specific game. So, I don't know. It's just, like, a lot of, like, really dumb decisions. And then LGD just did the same shit. They just were like, okay, well, we'll just scale better. And, oh, there's a LeBlanc. Okay, well, all right, you just go Mob, Milmortius on Cog, and we'll just all build counter AP items, and okay, I guess you can't do anything now, we're just going to roll you over. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was just really weird decisions going into that series in general. And then they were just so discouraged in Game 3 that they pretty much just let LGD do whatever they want. And it was, wow, no initiative at all from ADG.
Alright, I think that's pretty fair. So for now, we'll just move on to the other semifinal. How do you guys feel about the IGQG series? What was the deciding factor between the two teams?
It was so impactful that I literally don't remember a single
Yeah,
game. That's it.
it is not the greatest.
Italy was the deciding factor.
Yeah, Swift.
For the most part, because you had the first two games, Swift had Nidalee and Kakao was like literally useless, and then the next two games, Kakao had Nidalee and Swift was literally useless, and then the fifth game they banned Nidalee, and then TNT just played Sivir and Kid and Kitties like died randomly, and then they just won.
That's a pretty good description of the set. I
Yeah,
still think
that's good. That's a good TLDR.
I still think Chaogu was like I said this in the last episode, but I don't think it released or whatever, but I do still think that they have like this pedestalization issue with Swift that they've been trying to get over that they fixed in the finals, I actually think. So yeah, that was like the one thing I didn't really like about the QG versus IG set is it's like it seems like they want TNT to carry, but it still feels like even if he gets a lot of resources funneled to him that it's still like the Swift team. So I don't know. Yeah. The Swift show. Why didn't they say that? It makes so much more sense.
Yeah, you have to.
My bad.
You have to focus a lot of resources on healing for Swift, which is what I actually think is the good thing about Chaogu is that you can make both. You can have TNT like TCT focus entirely on peeling for like Swift and D, and then to an extent also Doinb focus on peeling for Swift and D, and then both Doinb and TNT like literally don't need peel. They're just fine. So I think that's probably the strength of Chaogu is that both of their main like traditional carry roles are extremely self-sufficient.
I have something to add to that, but I'm going to save it till when we talk about the finals.
Alright. That being said, for the third place match, how do you guys feel about IG? And regarding the problems you guys highlighted about EG in their previous semifinal, do you think they persisted throughout the third place match?
I actually think IG were super genius in EDG in the EDG set because they just king banged Clearlove so hard. They just banned him out every single game, and they made it so he couldn't do anything. And Clearlove was still stupid enough to pick like farm reliance junglers. Like, wait, wasn't he?
No, he played Lee Sin. He played.
Didn't he play
Drexxins? He played.
No, he
Echo.
Yeah, he.
Well, I think in that first game, yeah, I do think that. I do think that in the first game, like them going comfort pick screwed them over because even if they played mechanically well, there was really nothing they could do because LGD had a comp that made sense they could just sit there and scale with. And Mako was the only one that had Engage on their team, and it was Annie, so that's super unreliable. You have to wait for Flash to be up every time to get Tibbers and Engage. And eventually they just scaled so hard that it didn't even matter if he stunned like 4 or 5 people. And the decisions they made outside of that were just so stupid late game. Like Def didn't build any armor pen, so you could, and like it's not like they could just stun the backline and destroy them because Def couldn't get to them. So the front line was just so tanky that he did no damage. And then like Clearlove was playing super derpy, and he tried to be like a superhero and like dive in and steal dragons and shit late game, and it would get him like caught in the dragon pit. And so yeah, it was like really really sloppy. And I agree, they just weren't on the same page, but they also just made really really weird like fundamental decision errors, and that was really strange to me.
Kelsey, you have anything to add to that?
So, yeah, I wanted to say that, first of all, when you see a team where a bunch of individual players seem to be playing like questionably, it's usually not that they all are randomly deciding to screw up. It's just that they're being on the same page. Their shot calling is really weird. And I think that was pretty clear here is that they didn't necessarily know what to do. And part of that, again, goes back to drafting because, for example, in Game 2, they had that really awkward composition with Ryze, Lee Sin, LeBlanc, Corki, and Braum. Where it's just like, Clearlove would go into team fights and just die, right? And then, but if you're the rest of the team and you're watching him initiate, and you have like this LeBlanc and all this other stuff, and you're just like, what the fuck are we supposed to do with that? So, I don't really understand the argument that they all played poorly or someone played poorly. And for example, I think Pawn played okay until game 3. I wasn't really super impressed with his Victor. The big thing about some of their drafting, though, for me was it wasn't just that they all went for comfort picks. And okay, so not so much the drafting, but when you look at the first 2 games, especially, their initial gameplay was much better. They actually had the early leads in both of the 2 games. So when people make the argument that TBQ out jungled Clearlove, I don't.
And I actually